Yeah, there we go. That looks pretty good. Basically speaking, the float property allows other elements to flow around it. Now, there is one thing I want to show you. I'll add a border around the body of our document. Let's select our body element. I will create a border that is 3 pixels solid. Now check this out. With my second image, it's overflowing outside of the container that it's in, the body of my document. There is one change we can make to our container, our body. With our container, I will set the display property to be flow-root. Now anything that's floating will stay within the container. It's not going to overflow. Pikachu is still within the box. Alright everybody, in conclusion, the float property allows other elements to flow around it, and that is the float property in CSS. Hey, what's going on everybody? Today I'm going to explain the overflow property in CSS. The overflow property sets the defined behavior when content does not fit in the parent element box, meaning it overflows. There's 5 states: visible, hidden, clip, scroll, and auto. Here's an example. Let's create a div element. Then within this div element, I'll create a paragraph. I'll generate some text. Then going to our style sheet, I'll take our div, then give this div a border of 2 pixels solid. I'll also limit the height. Height, 75 pixels. Now we have a problem. The content of our paragraph is overflowing out of our div. We have a couple different ways of handling this with the overflow property. By default, overflow is set to visible. There's going to be no apparent change. Basically, we're stating if any inner elements will overflow, allow it to do so. That's why you see this text overflow out of our box. Our second state is hidden. With hidden, any content that will overflow outside of our box will be hidden. We can no longer see it. However, we can still interact with it. For example, if I were to copy and paste all of this text, well, we still have the full text available. Now, clip is very similar to hidden. There's no apparent change. With overflow set to clip, it's used in tandem with the overflow clip margin property. Using this property, we can set how far this content displays or overflows outside of the box. If I were to set overflow to be 13 pixels, this content will overflow by this amount, 13 pixels. Then the rest is hidden. It's very similar to hidden, but it's used alongside overflow clip margin. Then we have scroll. With scroll, our box contains a scroll bar, both vertical and horizontal. We can use the scroll bar to see the entire length of our content. If there's not enough content within this container, for example, I'll delete most of these words. Well, we still have that scroll bar, although it's disabled. If you set overflow to auto, if you don't need the scroll bar, either horizontal or vertical, it won't be displayed until you do need it. So let me undo these changes. Now that scroll bar is displayed. That's the use of overflow auto. Alright everybody, so that's the overflow property. It sets the behavior for a parent element when the content doesn't quite fit. You can set this property to be visible, hidden, clip, scroll, or auto. And that is the overflow property in CSS. Hey, what's going on everybody? Today I'm going to explain the display property in HTML and CSS. Now, HTML elements, they have a default display value. They're either block level or inline. An element that is block level starts on a new line and takes up the entire width available. Inline elements do not start on a new line. The width of that element is limited to what is needed. A few examples of block level elements would include, but are not limited to, header elements, div elements, paragraph elements, form elements, header elements, and footer elements. Inline elements include, but yet again are not limited to, span elements, anchor elements, and image elements. By utilizing the display property, we can specify if and how an element is displayed. We can set an element to be block level, inline, inline block, or not displayed at all. Here's a few examples. We'll create a div element with the inner text being div, and a span element with the inner text being span. Let me zoom in a little. Let's go to our style sheet. For my div element, I will set the background color to be red. For my span element, I will set the background color to be blue. That's good. Div is a block level element. It's going to take up the entire width available. Span isn't. It only takes up the necessary space needed to display that element. Even if I were to extend the width of the browser, my div element takes up the entire width. My span element stays the same because it's inline. We can apply a width and a height to a block level element, like this. Width will be 100, height will be 100. However, for an inline element, the width and height wouldn't apply. You can see that our span element stays the same size. By utilizing the display property, we can change the behavior of these elements, how they're displayed. If I set my div element to be block, well, it already is a block level element. There's no change. If I set my span element to display as a block level element, well, then we can apply a width and a height. These two elements are displayed as a block. All of this extra white space is allocated for each of these elements. They're block level. If I were to create a paragraph, let me shrink this a little bit. I'll create some sample text. I'll type lorem, then hit tab. These are not within paragraph tags, just so you know. All of this space is reserved for my block level elements. That's important later. Now let's go back to our style sheet. If I change the display property to be inline, guess what's going to happen? Well, both of these elements are inline now. We can't apply width or height properties to these elements. They only take up as much room as necessary. All other content is displayed in line with them. Then there's inline block. It's much like inline, but we can also apply a width and a height. These two elements are no longer taking up the entire width of my viewport. If I were to increase the size of my window, we can display content in line with these inline blocks. You can see that the text is lined up. Then there's none. None will effectively erase that element, as if it's gone. If I revert these displays to inline block, there's also the visibility property, which is fairly similar to display. If I set visibility to be hidden, with our div element, this element is hidden, but it's still taking up space as if it was still there. It's kind of like it's invisible. Whereas if display was set to none, it's as if it no longer exists. The next element will take its place. Alright everybody, that is an introduction to the display property. We can display elements as a block, inline, inline block, none, or by utilizing the visibility property we can hide them. And that is an introduction to the display property in CSS. Hey, what's going on everybody? Today I'm going to give you an introduction to the width and height properties in CSS. Alright, let's begin everybody. We will begin by creating two div elements, and each div element will have a class of box. Within our first box, let's create an h2 header with the text of "This is number 1." And we'll create a paragraph underneath. To generate some text in VS Code, you can type lorem, then hit tab. Alright, let's copy our div, paste it, change number 1 to number 2, and that's where we're at. So within our style sheet, we can set a height and a width for an element, an ID, or a class. So let's take our box class, .box. I'll add a border. Border 2 pixel solid, just so that it's easier to see. Here we are. Okay, normally with the height, by default, it's auto. We don't need to explicitly state that. You can see that there's no apparent change when I reload the page. So the height is going to be calculated automatically when we render our web page. But you can set an explicit height. For example, 100 pixels. That's a little too small. Our content is kind of overlapping. Let's change that to 200. Now it's a little too big. but it is possible to set a fixed height. So let's set height back to auto. Now we will change the width. So with the width, we can set a number of pixels, for example, 100. We would have two very long skinny columns, and they're right on top of each other. That's because divs are block level elements. We'll reserve this entire space for each of these div elements because they're block level. So let's change the width to 200 and see what happens. Now they're more of a box shape. If I set width to be auto, the width will be calculated automatically. And like I said, that's the default. These block level elements want to take up as much width as possible, kind of like your mom. If I changed width to be 50%, the width of this element will take up 50% the width of our viewport, but we're still allocating all the space for each div element because they're block level. If I were to use the float property, let's float to the left. The reason that these elements aren't floating, there's still not enough space to place box 2 next to box 1 because we have our border. Our border takes up 2 pixels. If I were to remove the border, they should display back to back, which they do. You do have to take in the width of the border when calculating the width. The same thing applies with padding. Let's apply a little bit of padding. Padding 25 pixels. Now we have 25 pixels worth of padding between our content and the border. I mean, it looks nice, right? When calculating the height or the width, we can disregard any padding or any borders, but we have to add this property. We'll add box-sizing border-box. When we calculate the height or the width we're allocating, disregard any padding or any borders. The box sizing property will take that into consideration. We can now fit these elements right next to each other. The width of each box is 50%, and they both have borders and padding. What you also might see with box sizing is that what some people like to do, they'll use an asterisk as a selector. That means all elements. And then they'll apply the box sizing property to all elements. Because, well, it can be kind of annoying to calculate width and heights while factoring in padding and borders as well. Alright, now if we were to float right, box 1 is on the right, box 2 is on the left. Let's undo that. You can set a minimum height and a minimum width as well. So with our 2 boxes, let's get rid of our paragraphs. I'm going to text align center, just to center our text. This is number 1, this is number 2. If I were to set the max width to, let's say, 25%, even though we stated the width should be 50%, the max width is going to cap that out at 25%. You can see that the sizes of these boxes have shrunk. Or maybe if I set a minimum width of 75%, we're saying that each of these boxes should be at least 75%, even though before we declared them to be 50%. You also have max height and min height. There's really going to be no change between the two. Since the height of our web page starts at the top here and ends right here, we're not using all the space down below. So what I propose is that let's place our boxes within a container. We'll create another div with a class of container to contain our boxes. Let's take our 2 boxes and place them within this div element. So with my container, the container class, with our container, let's change the background color to something gray, just so it's easier to see. We can't see our container because our boxes are taking up all the space. With our container, if we need to take up the entire height of our web browser, we can set the height to be 100 VH, meaning viewport height. So now our container is taking up 100% of the height available. If I were to zoom out, the container is still taking up all that space. So with our boxes, let's change the background color because I can't really see them that well anymore. For the background, let's change that to be white. I'm going to zoom out to 100%. With my minimum height property, I will set the minimum height of our boxes to be 50%. Now they take up 50% of the space available, which is 100% our viewport height. If I were to change the minimum height to be 100%, we take up the entire space available. Or I could set the max height to be 50%. Even though we set max height to be 50%, we don't necessarily need all this space, because there's not enough content. If I absolutely need these boxes to take up at least 50% of the height of my window, I would use minimum height instead of maximum height. So really, it's up to you. Alright everybody, so that is an introduction to the height and width properties in CSS. Hey everybody, so today I'm going to explain the position property in CSS. There's 5 possible values: relative, fixed, absolute, sticky, and static. Let's begin by creating a div section. I'll give this div an ID of box1. Within my style sheet, we will select the ID of box1. I'll set the width to be 200 pixels, height to be 200 pixels as well, and a background color, background-color. Let's go with the blue color. We haven't picked blue for a while. That's pretty good. Alright, the position property. With a position set to relative, relative positions an element relative to where it normally should be. With our position property set to relative, we can move this element to the right, to the left, upwards, or downwards. We do have the properties of top, bottom, left, right. To push this element down relative to where it normally is, I can set top to some value. We can do that in pixels. If I set top to be 100 pixels, this element will be pushed downwards by 100 pixels relative to where it normally is, in the top left corner. Another property is left. I will push this element to the right by 100 pixels by setting left to be 100. So now this element is pushed to the right by 100. Relative to where it normally is, it's down and to the right by 100 pixels. Negative 100 would move this element up. Left set to negative 100 would move the element to the left. It's kind of backwards. This element is positioned relative to where it normally should be. Then we have fixed. With fixed, an element is positioned relative to the viewport, meaning the web browser. For this example, we're going to need a whole lot of paragraphs, like 20 of them. I'll type lorem, hit tab to generate some text, copy this line, and paste it like 20 times. Alright, that's good enough. Let's get rid of these properties. I will set the position to be fixed. This element is now fixed within the viewport. It's stuck in the top left corner. If I were to scroll down, this element is still in the top left corner of my web browser. This element can be fixed to the right by setting the right property to be 0 pixels. 0 works as well. So now this element is in the top right corner. With the bottom property, if I were to set that to be 0 pixels, well, now this element is in the bottom right corner. This might be good for an advertisement if you had a banner. For the bottom left corner, that's left 0, bottom 0. That is the fixed position. This element is fixed in my viewport, my web browser. Then we have absolute. With absolute, an element is positioned relative to its nearest ancestor. Think of an ancestor as a containing class. Within box1, we'll create box2. Change the ID to box2. With box1, let's set box1 to be relative, then get rid of these properties. We'll create box2 by copying box1, change the ID to box2, the width will be 100, the height will be 100, but we'll pick a different color. Something red is good. The position for box2 will be absolute. Since box2 is contained within box1, box1 is its nearest ancestor. If I were to move box1, box2 is still going to stay in the top left corner of box1. Let me demonstrate. I'll set the top property to be 100 pixels. then left to be 100 pixels as well. So even though we're moving box 1, box 2, it's positioned absolutely. It's still going to stay within its container. Let's try and put box 2 right in the middle of box 1. I will set the top property to be 50 pixels. And the left property to be 50 as well. Now box 2 is right in the middle of box 1. We can move box 1 anywhere. Let's set the position of box 1 to be fixed. So box 2 is still going to stay right in the middle of box 1, no matter where it is. So that is the absolute position. An element is positioned relative to its nearest ancestor. Then there's sticky. A sticky element is positioned based on the current scroll position, meaning our scroll bar, so to say. With box 1 will be sticky. Let's set top to be 0 pixels. What happens now is that when I scroll down, our web browser is going to catch this element. Sticky is kind of similar to fixed. With sticky, we reserve some space for the original element. If I were to change that to fixed, this element is just basically stuck to the top of my viewport. With sticky, it's going to be in the same place until we scroll past it. Alright, then lastly, there's static. Static is the default position for an element. In the future, we will have the capability of changing these positions dynamically. To set a position to the default, which is static, you just change it. So those are the 5 position types: relative, fixed, absolute, sticky, and static. We'll have more practice with this in the future, so don't worry. This was more or less just an introduction. And those are CSS positions. Hey, how's it going, everybody? Today I'm going to show you how we can include a background image using CSS. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Alright, let's get started, everybody. What you'll need to begin with is a high-resolution picture for a background. I just so happened to find a picture of Central Park in New York City. The higher the resolution, the better. So place that image within your website folder. In our HTML document, let's create a title. I'm just going to say the word hello. And we'll need some text, just as a point of reference. I'll generate some text by typing lorem, then hitting tab, and that's good enough for now. So within our style sheet, I will select the body of our document. We are going to include that background image with the background image property. Then we need a URL. The URL is going to be a relative file path or an absolute file path to where this image is located. They're right next to each other. I just need the file name. So my image name is background, and this is a JPEG. Alright, so here's my image so far. It's gigantic, it's huge. Let me show you what happens if I use a smaller version of the same image. This image I think is like 500 pixels for the width or so. Background dash small. So here's my image, but it repeats itself. There is a background repeat property. So within the body of my document, I will set the background dash repeat property to be no repeat. Now this image isn't repeating. We're headed in the right direction. What we'll do now is take this image and center it in the middle of my viewport. Take the background dash position property and set that to center. It's centered horizontally. Another property we'll need is background attachment. Background dash attachment. I think I misspelled attachment. There we are. The background attachment property sets whether a background image scrolls with the rest of the page, or is it fixed. We will set the image to be fixed. Now this image is in the middle of my viewport. So even if I were to expand and contract it, it's still within the middle. Lastly, we need this image to take up the entire space of the background. And there's one last property. Background dash size. We will set that to cover. Now this image is taking up the entire space of my background. which is what I wanted. I'm going to use that high resolution picture that I used previously. That's much better. Alright everybody, so that's how to add a background image using CSS. Hey, what's going on everybody? Today we're going to discuss combinators in CSS. Combinators explain the relationship between listed selectors. There's 4 we'll discuss today. Descendants, which is just a space. A child, which is a right angle bracket. A tilde, which is a general sibling. And plus, which is for adjacent siblings. You would type something like this. You'll have selector 1, a combinator, for example, the child combinator, then another selector. If I said div, child combinator, then p, we're applying CSS properties to any paragraph elements found within this div section. What we'll do in this example is create a div section. I will give this div an ID of container. We'll create a few paragraphs. For paragraph 1, let's say this is number 1. We'll create another paragraph. Then we'll create an inner div section. This div section will not have an ID. But within this inner div section, we'll have another paragraph. This is number 3. Outside of our div with an ID of container, we'll create 2 more paragraphs. This is number 4. This is number 5. That's all we'll need for now. Just to make it a little more clear that this is a div section, I'll take our container, then give it a border. Border, 2 pixels, solid. Paragraphs 1, 2, and 3 are within a div section. 4 and 5 are not. I would like to highlight all paragraphs within my ID of container. I will take my ID of container. Then I will use the descendant combinator, which is an empty space. Then list another selector. I'm going to highlight all paragraphs within my div section. That would be my div section, space. Then what am I applying CSS properties to? My paragraphs. Let's take the background color and set that to be yellow. Something like that's fine. All paragraph descendants of our container, change the background color to yellow. That is the descendant combinator. It's just an empty space. Then you have children. Children is a right angle bracket. Highlight any paragraph children of our container class. Only 1 and 2 are highlighted. That's because 3 is not technically a child. It's a descendant. Think of it like a grandchild in this case. Paragraphs 1 and 2 are direct children of our container. But our third paragraph is 1 more level deep, because it's wrapped within another div section. It's a descendant, but not a child. All children are descendants, but not all descendants are children. That would apply to number 3. That's why only 1 and 2 are highlighted. That is the child combinator. Then we have general sibling, which is represented with a tilde. Take any paragraphs that are general siblings of our container. That would highlight 4 and 5. Paragraphs 4 and 5 are both siblings to our container. They're both considered children of the body of my document, therefore they're siblings, like brothers and sisters. But if I were to wrap these 2 paragraphs within a div section, well, now they're no longer siblings. This div section is now a sibling to this first div section. Think of it this way. Paragraphs 4 and 5 are nieces and nephews to the first div element. Alright, let's reverse that. Then we have adjacent siblings. Using a plus sign, we will select only adjacent siblings. 4 is selected, but not 5. The adjacent sibling is the next direct sibling, but not all siblings. That's why 4 is selected and not 5. But if I change their positions around, 5 is now selected. Alright everybody, so those are combinators. They explain the relationship between listed selectors. You have descendant, child, general sibling, and adjacent sibling. And those are combinators in CSS. Hey, how's it going everybody? Today I'm going to explain pseudoclasses. Pseudoclasses are keywords added to a selector. They modify the behavior of an element when they're in a certain state. For example, I have a button. When I hover my cursor over the button, I set this button to increase in font size and also change the background color to green. Hover is an example of a pseudoclass. It modifies our button's behavior. Active is when an item is currently selected, so with my mouse, I'm going to left-click the mouse button and hold it. The button is now red. Basically, they modify a special state of an element. So let's begin with a few examples. Let's go to our index file, and we will create a hyperlink. I will set the href attribute to be, I don't know, Google or something. https://google.com. Be sure to close it. I'll type the word Google. Here is my hyperlink to Google. A link is also a pseudoclass. I will select any anchor tags that we have. We have one. I'll set the link pseudoclass to have these CSS properties. So a:, then the name of the pseudoclass. Instead of this text being blue, let's set it to be like a light blue. I will set the color property to be a light blue color. Let's pick one. That's pretty good. When I hover my cursor over this link, I want the color to change. We are selecting any anchor tags, then we will use the hover pseudoclass. And I will change the color. You know what? Let's use what we currently have. I'll just make it a little brighter. Now when I hover over this link, the color changes. I'll increase the font size too. It's kind of like we're zooming in on this element. Let's do 1.1 EM. So the font size increases slightly. Active kicks in when you're holding down the cursor over an element. active. Let's change the font size to be 1.1 EM again. I will set the color to be, let's go with the dark blue color. When I left click on the mouse and hold it, this link is now in the active state. If a link is visited, by default it's purple. Let's change that. visited. When our anchor element is in the visited state, I'll change the font color. Color, how about a gray color? There. Alright, so those are a few basic pseudoclasses. In this next example, we'll need a list, an unordered list. We will need 10 list item elements. This is number. Okay, let's copy this, paste it 9 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now we will select any list items and use the hover pseudoclass. When I hover over one of these list items, I will change the background color of that list item to be a highlighter yellow color. I will change the background color to be yellow. Let's go with that. So check this out. When I hover over a list item, the background color changes. There's also the not pseudoclass. We can select anything that is not being hovered over. Not kind of does the opposite. Anything that is not in this state, anything that's not being hovered over. Let's set the color to be like a gray color. Anything that's not currently being hovered over is gray, but when it is hovered over, it's yellow. So that is the not pseudoclass. Anything that is not in this state will have these CSS properties. Then we have the nth child pseudoclass. List item, nth child, parentheses. Anything that's selected, let's set to be yellow. Depending on what value you put within the parentheses, that element will be selected. 1 corresponds to the first element, 2 is for the second, 3 is for the third, 9 is for the ninth element. For all odd number elements, type odd. For all even elements, type even. For every third element, that would be 3n. 3, 6, 9. For every fourth, that would be 4n. You can add an offset too. Normally with 3n, that's every third. But if I want to start at the beginning, I can add plus 1, 1, 4, 7, or even plus 2, 2, 5, 8. It's kind of like a formula. This is really handy with JavaScript because you can place a variable within here. The value of that variable can change, which is pretty cool. All right, last example. Let's create a div element with an ID of greeting. The text will be hover here. Within our div element, let's create a paragraph element with some text of hello. Normally, I want this hello message to be hidden until we hover over this element, our div element. I'm going to style our greetings p element. I'll set the background color to be maybe a blue this time. Like a light blue. I'll add a little bit of padding too. Maybe 10 pixels. To make this element invisible, I can set the display property to be none. What I would like to do when I hover over this element, I want this element to be displayed. We are selecting our greeting. Then when we hover over it, I want the p element of this div section to have the display property of block. Display it as a block level element. When we hover over this element, it displays the p element within our div section. This will come really handy when we create drop-down menus. Those are pseudo classes. Elements can have special states, like when they're being hovered over or you click on them. Using these pseudo classes, we can apply CSS properties to those elements when we interact with them, and those are pseudo classes in CSS. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today I'm going to explain pseudo elements in CSS. Pseudo elements are keywords added after a selector that are used to style a specific part of an element. You have a selector, for example, h1, then 2 colons, then a pseudo element. One you might see is first dash letter. We can add some CSS properties and style the first letter of our h1 element. That's the formula. Selector, 2 colons, pseudo element. Let's begin. In this example, we will need an h1 element. Why don't you go ahead and type in the word hello or something? I really don't care. And we will need a paragraph. To generate some text, you can type lorem, then hit tab. And a list. Let's create an unordered list with an ID of fruit. We'll have 3 list items. The first list item will be apple. Second will be orange. Third, banana. Let's give each of these list items a unique ID as well. ID will be apple, orange, then banana. All right, that is good enough for now. Let's head to our style sheet. We will use the first letter pseudo element to change the first letter in our h1 element. We have our selector h1, 2 colons, then a pseudo element. First letter is 1. What would we like to do with the first letter? Let's set the font size to be 2em. Basically, that's 200%. The H in hello is larger now. And I will set the font style to be italic. That is the first letter pseudo element. let's select our paragraph. Paragraph, 2 colons. We can apply CSS properties to the first line of some text. First dash line. What would we like to do? Let's change the background color. Background dash color. I'll pick a yellow color. Something like that's fine. Alright, so the first line is now a highlighter yellow color. If I change the size of the window, the first line is still going to have that background color. Then the selection pseudo class is anything that's currently selected with our mouse. We're selecting our paragraph element, 2 colons. Then we will use the selection pseudo element. Anything that's selected with our mouse. Normally the text is white and the background is blue. Let's change that. Let's set the color to be white. Well, I guess that's the same. And the background color to be... let's go with a dark grayish color. No, better yet, let's make the color green for the text. Yeah, that's kind of cool. So anything that's selected will have a font color that's green and a background color that's dark gray. Now let's go to our list. The list had an ID of fruit. Then I would like to select any list items. With any list item, we will use the before pseudo element. We can add something before each list item. I'll add a checkmark emoji. We can do that with the content property. Then within a set of quotes, I can select an emoji. So if you're on Windows, you can hold the Windows button, then semicolon, and there's a prompt for an emoji. I will find a checkmark. That looks good. Now, before any list item, add a checkmark, which we have. There's also the after pseudo element. We have a list item with an ID of apple. After this selector, let's add some content. I will add an emoji of an apple. Apple. There we are. Let's do this with orange and banana as well. Apple, orange, banana. Let's change these emojis. Orange, then banana. Those are the before and after pseudo elements. Before or after some element, we can add or change some content. Now with the list item, you can change the marker. For an unordered list, the default is a bullet point, but let's change that. With our unordered list of fruit, let's select any list items and use the marker pseudo element. Let's change the marker to be a check mark, but I'll delete what we have with the before pseudo element. I will also change the color of this check mark to be green. Pretty cool. Let's make it a little bit bigger too. Font size 1.2 EM. There. Alright everybody, so those are pseudo elements. You have a selector, 2 colons, then a pseudo element which can add specific CSS properties to that selector. And those are a few pseudo elements in CSS. Hey everybody, today I need to explain pagination in HTML and CSS. Pagination is the method by which a document is separated into pages and numbers are given. Using pagination on a website, we can move between pages easily. It's kind of like you're reading a book. Each page has a number. Pagination might also be useful on your web page if you need to limit the results. Maybe you only want so many results per page. Then you can easily navigate between the pages. There's many different uses. So let's begin. We'll start with our index file. I will create an h1 element with the title of "This is page number 1." Then we'll create some sample text. Within a paragraph element, I'll type lorem, then hit tab to generate some text. Usually with pagination, it's found at the bottom of a web page, so that's a good place for it right here. There's many different ways in which we can create pagination, but using only what we know so far that I've covered in this series, here's one way. We'll create a div element with a class of pagination. Then be sure to close it. Within this div element, we'll create several hyperlinks. We'll need an a tag. I'll set the href attribute just to be empty for now, and then we'll close it. For this example, let's create a total of 7 links. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Beginning with the second link, that will be 1, then 2, 3, 4, 5. For my first link, I'll use a left angle bracket. This is so we can navigate backwards, depending on what page we're on. And with the last link, I'll use a right angle bracket so we can navigate forwards. We'll revisit this page. Let's head to our style sheet. The first thing I'm going to do is center all of these links within my div element. I'm selecting my class of pagination. I will use the text align property, set it to center. Then I would like to style all of these links, these hyperlinks. We're starting with our pagination class. Then I would like any A elements found within the pagination class. Let's change the color. I will set the color to be black. Let's eliminate the text decoration. That is the underlining. Text decoration none. I'll add a little bit of padding. 8 pixels by 15 pixels. I will display these elements as an inline block. Basically, by setting these elements to have a display property of inline block, we can adjust the width and height of these elements. But what we have is good already. Alright, so far so good. Going back to our HTML file, I'm going to make one change. We're beginning with page 1. That's our index file. With this anchor tag, I will set the class to be active. Within our CSS file, we're taking our pagination class, find all A elements within our pagination class, then find any active classes. So it's going to look a little strange. Within the pagination class, within any anchor tags, find the class that's active. So in this case, it would be page 1. I will change the background color of that element. Background color. Let's pick a greenish color. But feel free to pick any color you like. That's pretty good. Let's try and make the font weight bold. I want to see what that looks like. Okay, not bad. This part's optional, but I'll add a border radius around this element, the one that's currently highlighted. Border radius, 5 pixels seems fine. Yeah, that looks pretty good. All right, now if any element is not active, we can style them. This part's going to look a little strange. Select the pagination class. With any A elements, we will use the hover pseudo class. If these elements are hovered over, but they're not active, then I'd like to highlight them. We'll use the not pseudo class. Find any elements that are not within the active class. I will change the background color to something maybe gray, like that. Then I'll add a border radius of 5 pixels. When we hover over these inactive links, they should change in color. Let me make that a little bit lighter, though. That looks pretty good. Now we need some functionality for these pages. If we click on one, that should take us to our first file, which is named index.html. Or it could be named something else for you. The second link will bring us to a page named page 2, which we still need to create. Then page 3.html, page 4.html, page 5.html. Now with these back and forwards buttons, we can easily navigate through pages using JavaScript, but unfortunately we really don't know JavaScript at this point. At this point in time, the easiest way for us to move forwards or backwards using these arrows is to list a specific file. If we're on page 1 and we need to move forwards, that will bring us to page 2. For the last hyperlink, I will set that to be page 2. If we're on page 1, then we hit the backwards button, well, we're really not going to go anywhere. we can either leave this link empty, or we can refresh the page just by listing the page that we're currently on. Now we need to create these pages. What I'm going to do is go to our website folder. I will copy this index file, paste it, then rename this copy as page2.html. Let's copy page 2, paste it, change page 2 copy to page 3. We're going to do this all the way until we reach page 5. Now, if we go to page 2, let's change the title to be page 2. The back button will bring us to our index file, also known as page 1 in this case. Let's set the class of active to be within the anchor tag, page 2. Then if we move forwards, we want to go to page 3. So then if we go to page 3, if we move backwards, we're going to page 2. Set the class that's currently active to be on page 3. Then if we go forwards, we're on page 4. Oh, be sure to change the title too, I forgot. 2, 3, we're good. Then on page 4, this is page 4. If we move backwards, we're going to go to page 3. Change the class to reflect page 4. If we move forwards, we'll go to page 5. Then lastly on page 5, this is page 5. If we move backwards, we're going to page 4. Move the class over to page 5. Then we can't really go forwards, so I'm just going to set the forward button to be page 5 again, just to refresh it. Or you can eliminate it, either way. All right, let's see if this works. Be sure to save everything. So we should be able to move between the pages by clicking on these buttons, or the arrows. We're on page 1, we can go to page 2, 3, 4, 5. We can also use the arrows. 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, everybody, so that's pagination. It's a method by which a document is separated into pages, and that is simple pagination in CSS. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today we'll create a drop-down menu only using HTML and CSS. So let's get started. The first thing we'll create is a div section. I will give this div section a class of dropdown. Then within this div section, I'll create a button. What kind of drop-down menu should we create? Let's create a drop-down menu for food. Then we'll need a div section to hold all of the different content within our drop-down menu. I will give this inner div section a class of content. Within my content class, I'll create a few hyperlinks. I'll set the href attribute to be nothing, but you can put a file path or a URL in here. I'll create 3 elements for our drop-down menu. The first will be apple, orange, then banana. This part isn't necessary, but for my demonstration, I'm going to create a paragraph of text. I'll type lorem, then hit tab. That will generate some text. All right, that is all the markup that we need for this video. Let's head to our style sheet. The first element I'll apply some CSS properties to is our button. With my drop-down menu class, I will select any buttons. I will change the background color to be something else. I'll use HSL values. I'll go with 80% for the lightness. For the font color, I'll pick white. I'll add a little bit of padding around the text. Padding, 10 pixels by 15 pixels is good. I'll remove the border by setting the border property to be none. Then I'll change our cursor to be a pointer when we hover over the button. Cursor, pointer. Now when I hover over the button, my cursor changes to a pointer. The next elements that will change are the A elements. Within my drop-down menu class, take any A elements, then apply the CSS properties. Let's display all of these items as a block. I will set the color to be black. I'll remove any text decoration. That's the underline, basically. Text decoration, none. And I will apply a little bit of padding. 10 by 15 pixels. We have one issue. All of the content within my drop-down menu is pushing all of the other content on my web page down. Eventually, we'll set the position of our content to be absolute to take it out of the normal flow of our web page. With our drop-down menu's content class, let's change the background color first. Background color, I'll use HSL values. Let's go with 95% lightness. I will set the position property to be absolute. Then I'll set a minimum width for the content. I'll stick with 100 pixels, but feel free to adjust this value. Then I'll add a box shadow. Box shadow, the first value is for the horizontal positioning. The second number is for the vertical positioning. The third value is for the level of blur. Then select a color. To make the shadow a little bit lighter, if I'm using HSL values, I can adjust the position of this bar and change the opacity. Let's go with like 80%. That looks pretty good. Normally, I don't want this content to be displayed unless I hover over our button. I will set the display property of our content to be none to hide it. When I hover over our button, then I'd like to display that content. Let's take our drop-down menu class and apply the hover pseudo class. With our content, I would like to set the display property to be a block again. Now when I hover my cursor over the button, it displays our drop-down menu. Here's a few extra changes I'm going to make. When I hover over the button, I'll change the background color of the button. With our drop-down menu class, I'll apply the hover pseudo class, take our button within that class, then change the background color. I'll set the lightness to be like 70. The background color of the button is changing now. Then lastly, when I hover over one of these A elements, I also would like the background color to change. With my drop-down menu, take any A elements. When I hover over them, change the background color. For the lightness, I'll set that to be like 90. That looks pretty good. All right, here's the last change that we're going to make. With our div section, it's a block level element. When I hover my cursor over this area, even though it's all white space, we still display the drop-down menu. The last change that I'm going to make is set the drop-down menu div section to display as an inline block. So when I hover over this white area, we don't display the drop-down menu until I move my cursor over the button. Then the menu is displayed. All right, everybody, so that is a simple drop-down menu only using HTML and CSS. Hey everybody, in today's video we're going to create a navigation bar using HTML and CSS. So let's get started. We'll begin by creating an H1 title for the title of our web page. Why don't you go ahead and type in your name or your employer's name or your business name, really doesn't matter. Then I'm going to use a nav element, also known as a navigation element. Navigation elements are typically used for a set of navigation links. I will give this nav element a class of navbar. Then within this navigation element, I'll create an unordered list. My unordered list will contain one list item for each category in my navigation bar. For the first list item, let's create a category for home. I would like to turn this category into a hyperlink. I'll surround this text with a pair of A tags. Within the opening A tag, I will set the href attribute to be, I'll just keep it empty for now. We'll fill that in later. Let's copy our list item, paste it a few times, maybe a total of 4 links. For the categories, let's have home, about, products, and contact. These are a few common categories you may see for a navigation bar. Alright, then outside of our navigation bar, let's use a main element for the main content for our web page. I'll add an h3 element for a sort of subtitle for the main section of our content. This is the home page. Then I'll add a paragraph of text. To generate some text in VS Code, you can type lorem, then hit tab. Alright, that is what we need for now. Let's go to our style sheet. The first thing I'm going to do is text align our h1 element and set it to center. Text align center. The text in our h1 element should be right in the center. I will take our navigation bar class, select our unordered list, set the list style type to be none to remove the bullet points, and they are gone now. I'll also change the background color. Let's pick a dark gray color. I'll set the lightness to be 25. I'll remove any padding, as well as any margins. Let's style these hyperlinks. Within our navigation bar class, take any A elements, set the color to be white, remove the text decoration. Text decoration will be none. That removes the underline. I'll add some padding of 15 pixels. I will display these elements as a block. Then text, align, center. There we are. This navigation bar is a vertical style navigation bar. This is a style you may see at the bottom of a web page. When I hover over one of these links, I want to change the background color. We will take our navigation bar class, take any A elements, then apply the hover pseudo class. When I hover over one of these hyperlinks, I'll change the background color. I'll turn down the lightness slightly to 10% lightness. There we are. If you would like a horizontal navigation bar, here's a change we can make. With our navigation bar class, take any list items, then we will float left. One change we'll make within our unordered list, set the overflow property to be hidden. Alright, that's pretty good so far. There is a little bit of margin around the body of my document. I am going to set margin to be 0. With our body element, set any margin to be 0 pixels. If you would like margin around the main content of your page, we will take our main element, then set margin to be, let's stick with 20 pixels. You also could put margin just on the left side and the right side. You know what? I'm going to set margin left to be 20 and margin right to be 20. Alright, then lastly, let's fill in these href attributes. For the href attributes, I will set my home link to be index.html, about will be about.html, products.html, and contact.html. We're going to go to our website folder. We'll create a few copies of our index file. We need 3 more files. 1, 2, 3. Let's rename one of these as about.html. Then products.html. then contact.html. So let's open about. I'll change the header element of our main element to be, this is the about page. Let's apply that for products. This is the products page. Then contact. This is the contact page. All right, and that should be everything. Let's see if this works. We're currently on the home page. I can go to the about page, products, contact, and home. In this example, they're all relatively the same except for the H3 title. All right, everybody, and that's how to create a navigation bar using HTML and CSS. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today I'm going to show you a basic website layout using HTML and CSS. All right, let's begin. So we should know what semantic tags are. Semantic tags, they include, but are not limited to, headers, nav elements, main, section, aside, articles, and footers. You'll want to use semantic tags because they keep your content organized, they're better for search engine optimization, and they assist with screen readers and other technology for accessibility. So I've already written some HTML markup. I just want to describe this first. Headers are used for introductory content, such as a title, a logo, or author information. Nav elements, they're used for navigation bars or other links. Sometimes you may find a set of navigation links at the bottom of your page, but having a navigation bar is fairly common. Now, the main content, which is all of this, it can contain one of many sub-elements, such as sections, aside elements, articles, and generic div elements. So sections, which is what I've created here in the middle, this is for dependent content. You would typically put anything you want within a section. It's typically used for dependent content. If I were to take this section out of the web page, then put it on another web page, it might not necessarily make sense. Like, what is it for? That's why it's dependent. An aside element is meant for side content. This can include author information, fun facts, quotes, external links, comments, or really any other related content that's related to a section. Now, an article, this represents independent content. This could include news articles, job posts, or blog posts. Articles are really similar to sections. With articles, it's meant for independent content. For example, a news article. If I were to take this news article, cut it out, and put it on a different website, it would still make sense. It's independent content. It's not reliant on the context of the website, whereas in a section would be. And then lastly, we have footers. A footer is for closing content. This could include author information, copyright information, and sometimes navigational links. There's really no one-size-fits-all approach. Really, the design is up to you, but this is a really common format. Now that we know the basics, let's actually design this. All right, so we will create our semantic elements. We have a header, a nav element, a main element, and a footer element. Within our header element, let's just add an H2 element that says header. So let's go to our style sheet. I'll take our header element. Let's change the background color. Background-color, let's pick a light gray color. I'll use HSL values because I like them. 84 or 85 is good. Then let's text align center. And add a little bit of padding. 25 pixels. Okay, let's work on our navigation bar. It's not going to be a fully functioning navigation bar. We've done that in a previous video. Let's just allocate some space for a navigation bar. It is common to have more than one navigation element per web page. If we're creating a navigation bar, we should set the class to be something like navbar, so it's descriptive. Let's go to our CSS style sheet. I will select our navbar class, then change the background color. Let's go with the darker color. I'll add some height. Height 50 pixels. And that should be good. We're just allocating some space. We're not creating a full navigation bar. There's a little bit of margin around the body of our document. I'm going to remove that by selecting our body element, Then set the margin to be 0 or 0 pixels. That should get rid of the margin. All right, then we have our main element. Our main element can include any combination of aside, sections, articles, or even just some generic div elements, but we won't be working with div in this video. Really, you can see any combination of aside, section, article, or div. Or maybe even none of them. It's up to you. In this topic, we'll stick with one aside element, one section, and one article. These elements are kind of like sub-elements within our main element. Our main element is going to be the main steak and potatoes of our web page. So with our aside element, I'll include an H2 element for a header. This is aside. Let's do the same thing for section. This is a section. Then this is an article. Let me separate these just so that they're easier to see. Just to take up some space, I'm going to create some sample paragraphs. Our aside element will have 1. Our section will have 2 paragraphs. I'm just copying and pasting. And our article will have 2 as well. I don't want this top to bottom layout. We can change that with some CSS properties. So let's work on our aside element first. With our aside element, I'll set the width to be 20% of the width of the web page. Our aside element only takes up 20% of the space available. The following elements can float. We have to set the float property to be left then, in this case. All right, let's copy aside. Change aside to be section. That's our next element. I'll set the width to be 40%. Then we have article. Change section to article. And the width will stay at 40%. These 3 elements can all fit within the web page. The total width is under 100%. We have our 3 elements within our main element. So if you would like to add a little bit of padding, this is what you're going to do. Let's add 10 pixels of padding to each of these elements. When we calculate the width, we don't take into account any padding. So one change we're going to make is that at the top of our CSS style sheet, we can select all elements with an asterisk, then a set of curly braces. We will set the box sizing property to border-box. What we're doing with this property is that when we calculate the width, factor in the padding. All 3 elements should be lined up now. All right, then lastly, we have our footer. So within our footer element, I'll just add an H2 element that says footer. Then I will style it. Let's copy what we have for our header, paste it, change header to be footer. Now what we need to do is clear our float, because we're still floating the elements that come after. Let's display our footer as a block level element. To clear a float, you can set clear, then both. And that should clear that. All right, so here is a basic website layout for a desktop. This isn't a good format for a mobile device, though. With a mobile device, you would want each of these elements to be on top of each other so you can scroll down. We can add an @ rule. So @ media screen and max width 600 pixels. So what we're doing here is that if the width of our screen or window is 600 pixels or below, we can change some CSS properties. With aside, section, and article, let's select those. Aside, comma, section, comma, article. We'll just change the width to be 100%. If a user is on a mobile device and or the width is 600 pixels or below, then we'll switch to a mobile version of the web page. Each of these elements Our aside, section, and article elements are taking up 100% of the width available. Then if we were to expand this web page, or we're viewing on a desktop, we switch to the desktop version. This is also known as responsive CSS. Alright everybody, I know I covered a lot today, but that is a basic website layout using HTML and CSS. Hey, what's going on everybody? Today we're going to create an interactive image gallery using HTML and CSS. So let's get started. Before you do jump in, I would recommend downloading 3 pictures of your choosing. I have a picture of a pizza, a salad, and soup. If you're able to, try and find images that are roughly the same height and width. Once you have your 3 or more images, we are ready to begin. We'll begin with the first image. I'll use a div element, and I will give this div element a class of gallery, because it's, well, part of our image gallery. I will include my image. The source attribute will be the relative file path of the image. If you have a lot of pictures, I would recommend creating an images folder. You know what, let's actually do that. It'd be good practice. New folder, images. I'll move all of these images to my images folder. Alright, so I will list the relative file path. I need to navigate to the images folder, but of course you can use your own pictures, depending on what you're building exactly. Images dot, I think that was a JPEG. Alright, so this picture is massive. In case somebody is using a screen reader, it's good practice to add an alternative attribute. Then give a description of the image. Salad. I'll turn this image into a hyperlink by surrounding it with a pair of anchor tags. We can open this image in a new tab by setting the target attribute to equal underscore blank. Then I will set the href attribute to be the source of my image. I'll just copy and paste that. Just temporarily, I'm going to set a width for this image. Width equals 200. What we'll do now is add a description. It's entirely optional, but I think it would look nice. I will create a new div element with a class of description. I will type the word salads. We'll do some CSS styling a little bit later. Let's copy this entire div element, paste it twice. Then we just need to change the images we're using. My second image is soup. I'll change the alternative text as well. And the description, soups. Then my last image is pizza. The description will be pizzas. Alright, let's go to our style sheet. We are selecting our gallery class. I will set the display property to be an inline block. Currently, these images are block level elements. Now they're all lined up. I'll add a border. Border 1 pixel solid. Let's go with a dark gray color. I'll use HSL values. I'll set the lightness to 60%. I'll add margin of 5 pixels. The margin is applied outside of these div elements. If I were to increase this, you can see the difference. I'll keep that as 5 though. Let's work on the description for each image. We are accessing our gallery class. Then within the gallery class, we have the description class. That should be these div elements. Let's add a little bit of padding, 10 pixels, then text align center. Not bad. When we hover over one of these elements, let's change the border color. We are taking our gallery. We'll apply the hover pseudo class, then change the border and make it a little bit darker. I'll set the lightness to be like 20. There we are. Now the border changes when we hover over one of these elements. I'm going to delete these width attributes. Then go to our style sheet. We'll access our gallery class with any images. Set the width to be 100%. And height will be auto. Then with the gallery class, we can set the width 200 pixels. So basically what we did is that we set the width of each image to be 100% of the width of our gallery, whatever this is set to. If I were to set the width to be something larger, then the size of each element would increase. But I think 200 is fine. Alright, now let's test it. If we click on one of these images, we should see the full image in a new tab. That's the salad image, soup, and pizza. Alright everybody, so that is a simple image gallery using HTML and CSS. Hey, what's going on everybody? In this video, I'm going to show you how we can create some font awesome icons using HTML and CSS. Alright, let's get started everybody. I'm going to direct you to this website, fontawesome.com. This isn't a sponsorship or anything like that, but this is a pretty good place to get some icons. Google Icons is another good source. But I find that Font Awesome does have a large variety of icons. To start using icons from this site, from the homepage, we will start for free, because I don't like to pay for things. You will need a kit. You can type in your email, like fake@gmail.com, then send kit code, then you just have to confirm your email. Now once you log in, you'll have access to a kit. If I were to click on my kit, I have a line of JavaScript that contains a link to my kit. There's going to be a unique number. Let's copy the script, then place it in the head of our HTML document, right here. We now have access to those icons on Font Awesome. To browse for icons, go to the Icons tab. Then we can perform a search. I would like an icon of a home or a house. I would like this one, so I'll click on it. You can choose a classic style or a sharp style with sharp corners. This is solid, that's regular, this is light. I'll stick with solid. You can select animations, but I won't use animations for this example. You can rotate this icon, you can change the color, and you can change the default size. This is 2XS, this is 2XL. To include this icon, we can copy this element. It's an I element, so let's copy this I element. Within the body of my document, I can paste that I element, and there's my icon. If you want to remove the color and change it with your CSS style sheet, we can remove the style attribute. If you need something even larger than 2XL, we can change this element up to 10 times the size with 10x. That's a little too large for my liking. Let's go with 5x. Let's find 3 other icons we would like. I'm going to find the Twitter logo. That's right here. I need to copy this I element. Then I will paste it. Then I'll change the size. FA-5x. Okay, Twitter, YouTube would be good. Copy this I element, paste it again. I would like the 5x version, FA-5x. Let's select one more icon. Let's go with TikTok. And that is all we'll need. Again, I would like the 5x sized version. Alright, that's a good amount of icons. I will center all of these icons. One way in which I can do that is to place all of these elements within a div with the class of icons. Alright, let's go to our style sheet. I will take my class of icons, then text, align, center. To right justify these, we can set that to right, but I'll keep them in the center. I'll change the color of these icons. Let's begin with our house. We'll need to copy this entire class. I don't want the Sharp version. I will copy this entire class. Then within my style sheet, I will select that class. Dot, then paste the name of that class. Now we can't include spaces. You can replace the spaces with the dot. With our house icon, let's change the color to something gray. Let's go with the lighter color like that. Okay, let's do this with the other icons. Then we have Twitter. Replace the spaces with dots. I will change the color. So let's try and find Twitter blue. I think that's fairly close. Okay, then we have YouTube. Color red. Then TikTok. I think that's fairly close. All right, now what we'll do is turn these icons into hyperlinks. We'll surround each I element with a pair of A tags. Then within the href attribute, we can set that to some website. I won't set the href attribute to our house icon, but let's do that with Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. So with Twitter, I will set the href attribute to be https://twitter.com. Let's do this with our YouTube icon. Replace Twitter with YouTube. Then TikTok. So these should work. Let's click on Twitter. That works. YouTube. And TikTok. With hyperlinks, there is some underlined text decoration included. Let's remove that. Let's take our icons, then any anchor tags within our icons class. We'll set the text decoration to be none. And that should remove them. I'll also apply a little bit of margin between each of these icons. Let's do margin dash right, set to 20 pixels. Not bad. For some additional practice, when we hover our cursor over one of these icons, let's increase the lightness. Let's begin with our house. Let's copy these CSS properties, paste them. We'll apply the hover pseudo class. I'll increase the lightness by 10%. I went from 66 to 76%. When we hover our cursor over our house icon, it should be a little bit lighter. Okay, let's apply this for the other icons. Then we have Twitter. Apply the hover pseudo class. Ooh, I'm using RGB values. Let me change that to HSL. I'll increase the lightness to 60. Let's do this with YouTube. Then TikTok. All right, now when we hover our cursor over these icons, they should be a little bit lighter. TikTok is still a little bit dark. Let me increase it further to 30%. That's much better. All right, everybody, so that is an introduction to including icons in your web page using CSS. Hey, what's going on, everybody? In this topic, I'm going to give you an introduction to using Flexbox in CSS in about 10 minutes or so. Why don't you go ahead and sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. All right, let's jump in, everybody. We have a little bit of setup to do. We'll create a div element with the class of container. Within our container class, we'll create a few div elements. We'll create 4. These will be boxes. For the class, I will set that to be box. The first inner div element will have an ID of box1. The inner text will be 1. Let's copy our inner div element, paste it 3 times for a total of 4. Change box1 to box2 for the next element, then 3, then 4. And that's all we need for our HTML file. Let's go to our style sheet. We'll style our boxes. We will select the box class. I'll set the width to be 150 pixels. Same thing goes with the height. Let's change the background colors. We'll begin with the ID of box1. I will set the background color to be something red. I'll use HSL values because I like them. Let's go with that. Then let's color box2. Box2, let's make that yellow. Box3 will be green. Then box4 will be blue. Let's change the font size real quick. Font size 8em. Then text, align, center. I'll add a border radius just to round the corners. Border radius 15 pixels. And that is all the setup we'll need. We are ready to begin. With our container class, we can flex all of the elements within this container, meaning all of these inner div elements. So we'll take our container class dot container, then set the display property to be flex. You can see that the positioning of these elements has already changed. By default, the flex direction property is set to row. You can see that there's no apparent change when I refresh the page. For a row, but in reverse order, we can set flex direction to be row reverse. So now 1 is on the right-hand side, followed by 2, 3, then 4. To arrange these elements within a column, we can set flex direction to be column, or even column reverse. Then at the bottom we have 1, then 2, 3, then 4. So that's flex direction. Let's delete the flex direction property. Then we have the justify content property. Justify content sets the alignment on the main axis. Think of the x-axis. By default, it's flex start. There's no apparent change. Flex end would justify the content at the end. See, we're beginning with 4, then 3, 2, and 1. When we had flex direction set to row reverse, it was 1, 2, 3, 4. But in this case, it's 4, 3, 2, 1. Then there's center if you need to center align these elements on the main axis. We can place the extra space evenly between each of these elements by setting justify content to space between. And if I were to expand this page, the space between them is increasing. You also have space around. The area outside of these elements is also included now with space around. Then we have space evenly. All right, and that is the justify content property. We can justify elements on the main axis. Then there's the cross axis. Think of it as the y-axis, up and down. What we'll need to do in this example is expand our container. Just to show you the size of the container, I will add a border to the container class. Border, 10 pixels, solid, black. Here's my current container. I will increase the height of the container. Let's set the height to be 90 viewport height units. So this is the total size of my container now. 90% of the height of the web page. What we'll use now is the align items property, which is used for the cross axis. Align-items. The default is flex start. There's no change. Flex end will place these elements at the bottom of our container. Then there's center. Align item center. That will place them in the middle of the cross axis. Then there's baseline. So with baseline, the text is going to be aligned. They're all the same size, though. We can't really notice the difference. With box 1, let me change the font size. Font size 1 EM. You can see that the number 1 is aligned with the rest of the characters. So if I were to increase the font size, you can see that they're still aligned. But let's eliminate that font size property. Let's delete our align items property. We'll need more elements. Let's copy our 4 inner div elements, paste them. We should have a total of 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see that these items are getting squished now. They're all being compressed. We can set the flex wrap property. So with our container, I will set the flex wrap property to be wrap. These elements will now wrap if there's not enough space. If I were to expand the size of my container, there's now enough room, but if we run out of room, they'll be pushed down further down the page. By default, flex wrap is no wrap. Otherwise, there's wrap, reverse. Now they're in reverse order. Let's use flex wrap. Now, flex wrap is used along with another property named align content. Align content. If I were to set align content to be flex start, all of that space between the first row and the second is now gone. Then there's flex end. Center. Space evenly. Then space between. Use any combination of properties that I've demonstrated. Let's keep flex wrap as wrap, but I'll use flex start. You can also add a gap between the rows and the columns between each of these elements. Let's set a column gap, column-gap, to be 1 EM. That adds a gap between each of the columns. For the rows, that would be row gap. I'll set that to be 1 EM. You can also use pixels as well. So here's 2 EM and 3. Let's delete our gap properties. All right, let's also delete the extra 4 boxes that we have. We're also going to get rid of the flex wrap property, as well as align content. There's also the align self property that can be applied to single elements. So with box 1, I will set align self to be start. That's the default. This element will be aligned at the top of our container. If I were to change align self to be center, this single element is aligned in the center of my container, on the cross axis. Then we have end. That will align at the bottom. The align self property can be applied to any of these elements. Let's do that with number 2. Align-self. At the start, there's no change. Center, end. Okay, let's delete the align self property. We can use order to change the order of these elements. With box 1, I will set the order to be 1. That will place number 1 at the end. -1 would be the beginning, which it normally is already. With box 2, I'll set the order to be 1. That will place 2 at the end, but if I set it to be -1, it's now at the beginning. All right, everybody, so that is a quick introduction to Flexbox. There is a lot to talk about, and that is all the time that I have for this topic. And well, that's an introduction to Flexbox in CSS. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today we're going to cover the transform property in CSS. The transform property lets you rotate, scale, skew, or otherwise translate an element. Here's what we're going to do. We'll create a div section. I will give this div an ID of box 1. Then within the box, let's say the word hi. Let's head to our style sheet. Within my style sheet, I will take our ID of box 1, set the width and height to be 250 pixels, then I will give this div section a border of 5 pixels solid. Let's increase the font size. 13 EM is fine. Then text, align, center. Hey, let's change the background color too while we're at it. I'll pick a greenish color. That's pretty good. I'm also going to remove some of the margin around the body of our document. Body, margin, 0. Alright, so the transform property. The first transformation I'll show you is translate. We can translate X on the X-axis, translate Y on the Y-axis, or both with just translate. Let's begin with translate X. So after translate X, add a set of parentheses. Whatever value you place within the set of parentheses, we will translate this element on the X-axis. If I were to set translate X to be 50 pixels, this element will move to the right by 50 pixels. That's 100, 200. Negative numbers will move the element to the left. Percentages are fine too. If I set translate X to be 100%, this element will translate to the right by 100% the width of this element. With a negative percentage, that will translate the element to the left. It could effectively hide that element. Then with negative 50%, we should see just half of this element. A lot of these transformations can be done in pixels or percentages. There's also translate Y for the Y-axis. If I were to translate by 50 pixels on the Y-axis, that moves the element down. Negative 50 would move the element up. By 100%, we will move this element down by 100% the height of the element. Then negative 100% will effectively hide the element. You can combine both of them too with just translate, but you need two values. The translation on the X-axis, then the Y-axis. If I set the first number to be 50, well, 50 pixels, that's an X translation. The second value is a Y translation. Now we're moving the element to the right and down. Negative values will move the element to the left and then up. Those are translations for the transform property. Then we have rotations. We can rotate on the X-axis. Within rotate X, we set a number of degrees. If I were to set rotate X to be 45 degrees, we begin rotating on the X-axis. That's 45. This is 90. You can't even see it. 135. With 180, it should be kind of upside down. That is an X rotation. Then we have Y. Rotate Y. We'll start with 45 degrees. That's 45. 90. You can't even see it anymore. 135. 180. Then lastly, we have Z rotation. That's 45. This is 90. 135. 180. Those are different rotations. There's scale. We can scale X or scale Y. 1 corresponds to 100%. 1.1 is 110%. If I were to set scale X to be 2, we're scaling this element on the X-axis by 200%. 3 would be 300%. Any value below 1 would, in a way, compress it on the X-axis. And here is 0.25. We also have scale Y. Scale Y set to 2 would scale this element on the Y-axis by 200%. That's 300. Here's 0.5. And here's 0.25. You can combine both X and Y too, with just scale, but you need two values. So by default, it's 1, 1 for 100%. Let's scale on the x-axis and the y-axis by 200%. And here's 300. That is scale. Then we have skew, skew x or skew y. If I were to set skew x to be 45 degrees, we are skewing this element on the x-axis. Here's 90, 135, and 180. The same applies for y. Here's 45, 90, 135, 180. You could combine them both with just skew. Then again, you need two values following that same pattern. You can apply more than one transformation at a time. Let's begin with translate x by 100%, and then we will rotate on the z-axis by 90 degrees. Let's add a scale as well. I'll shrink this image by 50%. So yes, you can apply more than one transformation at a time. These transformations can also be applied to a class. Let's create two additional boxes. Box 1, box 2, box 3. I'll give each of these elements a class of box. I'll remove this transformation. I will select the box class, take all of these properties, cut them besides the background color, then paste them within the box class. Then let's color in our two other boxes. Box 1, box 2, box 3. I'll make box 2 red. Box 3 will be blue. Alright, let's apply some transformations to the class now. I will set the transform property. Let's translate on the x-axis. Translate x by 100 pixels. Then let's rotate on the z-axis by 45 degrees. Then I will shrink these with scale set to 0.5. You also could apply these transformations to images. I just so happen to have a picture of Shrek in my computer. I think everybody should have at least one, right? That image is saved within my website folder. Let's delete these boxes, then include that image. Image source equals the relative file path of the image. Alright. Let's take our image. I will apply the transform property. Let's translate our image on the x-axis by 100%. Then let's rotate Shrek on the z-axis by 180 degrees. Let's scale Shrek on the x-axis by 200%. Scale x 2. Alright, I don't know what the point of that was, but I thought it would be a fun exercise. Alright everybody, so those are transformations. It's a CSS property that lets you rotate, scale, skew, or otherwise translate an element. And those are a few basic CSS transformations. Hey, what's going on everybody? Today we're going to create some animations using CSS. Alright, let's get started everybody. We will create a div element with an ID of box. Then within this box, let's say the word hi. Let's go to our style sheet. Let's select our ID of box. I will set the width to be 250 pixels, the height to be 250 pixels. I'll change the background color. Let's pick something red. Let's change the font size. 13 EM is fine. Then text, align, center. To use an animation, we first need to create an animation using a keyframe rule. That can be done with typing @keyframes, then a unique animation name. Let's create an animation to slide this element from the right to the left. The name will be slide left. Then add a set of curly braces. Within our keyframe, there's a few possible values. You have to, from, or a %, such as 0, 50, 100, really any number. We'll begin with a left translation. For our element to end up in its resting position, we will use from, then add a set of curly braces, just like we're adding CSS properties. Within our keyframe of from, we will set the transform property to be an X translation. Translate X, parentheses. This can be an amount or a percent. Let's begin with 100 pixels. So now I need to set the animation name property within our box. Animation name will be slide left. But when I refresh everything, nothing appears to happen. That's because we need to set the animation duration property. Animation duration. How long will this animation take to complete? Let's start with 1 second. That's 1s. There's our slide animation. Feel free to adjust this value. If I set this to be 2 seconds, it's slightly slower. Let's change translate X to a different value, like 100%. This element is translating on the X-axis by 100% the width of the element. If I were to set this to a larger number, like 300, it's going to appear off-screen in my example, then slide into place. But that also depends on how far you're zoomed in or zoomed out, and the width of your web browser. Let's create an animation to slide right. Let's copy our keyframe rule, rename slide left as slide right. We'll use the value of 2. We'll begin in our original position. We're setting this animation to end up in this position, with our element translated to the right by 300%. Let's change the animation to slide right, and now we slide to the right. Okay, let's slide up. Keyframes, slide up. We'll set the value to be from. Then we will translate Y. Change the animation name to slide up. There we go. Then slide down. All we really need to do is change this value. So that's slide down, change from to be 2. Then change the animation name again. Slide down. Let's create a rotation animation. At keyframes, rotate. So we can use from, or to, or a percent. Let's use percentages. At 100%, what sort of transformation do we want to complete? Let's use the transform property, then do an X rotation. Rotate X by 360 degrees. That's one full rotation. Okay, let's change the animation name to rotate. Now we should rotate once on the X-axis. Let's rotate on the Y-axis. Rotate Y. Then rotate on the Z-axis. Rotate Z. So those are a few rotations. Now check this out. If I were to set the keyframe value to be 50%, we will complete this animation at the 50% mark. Then from 50% to 100, in a way we undo the animation. We'll rotate once and then revert back. Complete the animation at 50% of the length of the duration. Then with the other 50% of the time remaining, return that element to where it was previously. If I were to mess with these values, let's say 25%, we'll complete the animation in half a second. Then with the other 1.5 seconds, we return to normal. That's why the animation goes fast. Then when it's undone, it goes fairly slow. You can mess with these values depending on what you're looking for exactly. Yeah, you can use from, to, or a percent. Okay, let's create an animation to grow this element. We'll scale both the width and the height. At keyframes, grow. At the 100% mark, let's set the transform property to be scale. Then we can use 2 values. 2 means 200%. For the width, scale that up by 200%. Same with the height, 200%. Let's change the animation to be grow. Then this should grow. Then when the animation is complete, it snaps back into place. But if I were to set this value to be 50%, it's going to grow, then shrink back into place in one smooth motion. Let's create an animation to shrink. At keyframes, shrink. At the 50% mark, let's use the transform property, then scale by 0.5, 0.5. That will be 50% for the width and the height. Let's change the animation name to be shrink, and now we'll shrink this element. Then it reverts back into place. Okay, let's change the opacity. At keyframes, this animation name will be fade. At the 50% mark, let's change the opacity. We're not using the transform property this time. Let's set the opacity to be 0. Then change the animation name to be fade. Now we'll fade out, then back in again. If I were to set this value to be 100, this element will fade. Then when the animation is normal, it reverts. Not smoothly though. Let's set that to 50. Now if you want a fade in effect, what we can do is with our box, originally we can set the opacity to be 0. Then at the 100% keyframe, the opacity will then be 1. So this is fade in, let's say. So the element is originally hidden, then it fades in. Let's get rid of the opacity. Let's change the color of our element. At keyframes, color change. So at 0%, let's have the background color be red. I'll copy the current background color. I'll change the animation name to color change. Then at 20%, let's set the background color to be orange. So we're going from red to orange. Then at 40, let's pick yellow. $60 will be green. $80 will be blue. Then 100 will be purple. There. You can take the liberty to pick whatever values you would like. Let's create a glow effect around our element. At keyframes, glow. This animation will complete at the 50% mark. We'll add a box shadow. The first value is for the horizontal offset. We'll set that to be 0. The next value is for the vertical offset, which will also be 0. Then the blur radius. I'll set that to be 50 pixels. Then a color. Let's go with the yellowish color. Alright, then we need to change the animation name. Glow. Then our element glows. It's a little difficult to see though with the white background. Let me change the background color. So with the body of our document, I will set the background color to be a dark color. There's our glow effect. You can start animations with a pseudo class. For example, I want this glow animation to occur when I hover my cursor over the element. I am selecting my box ID, then applying the pseudo class of hover. I'll take the animation name and the duration, then place it within the hover pseudo class for our box. Then this animation only begins when I hover my cursor over the box. Pretty cool, right? If I were to use the active pseudo class, this animation only occurs when I left click and hold the element, which I am doing right now. Let's place these properties back. To change the iteration count for an animation, to have it occur more than once, we can set the animation iteration count property to be some other value besides 1. If I set this value to be 2, we will perform this animation twice. To have it perform infinitely, set that to be infinite. I would not recommend setting an animation to be infinite just because a viewer can find it annoying, unless that's the goal, to annoy the viewer. All right, there's also animation direction. Animation direction. Normally, this is, well, normal. We can change the direction of the animation by setting normal to be reverse. Now we're sliding to the right. To alternate, set the value to be alternate. We're sliding left, then sliding right, then sliding left again. There's also alternate reverse. We begin by sliding to the right, then to the left, and then to the right again. Let's set that to be normal. To pause the animation, we can set the animation play state to be paused. Now the animation is paused. To run it again, set this value to be running. This would be useful in conjunction with a programming language such as JavaScript because we can toggle this animation on and off. There's also the animation timing function. Normally with this animation, it accelerates, then slows down, it decelerates. The default value is ease in out. It speeds up, then slows down before it reaches its destination. For a constant speed, we can change that to be linear. Through the entire animation duration, it stays the same speed. There's also steps for a sort of stop motion effect. Within this function, if I place the value 5, there's 5 steps. If this was 10, there's 10 steps to complete the animation. It creates a stop motion effect. Let's change that back to ease in out. Let's set the iteration count to be 1. The next timing function is for cubic Bezier. Let's right-click on our box, inspect, underneath our Styles tab, look for animation timing function. If we were to click on this purple box, we can change the timing function. Currently it's ease in out. And there's a little sample animation at the top. This is fast out linear in, ease out, or by dragging and dropping this line, we can make something custom. Like, I don't know what this does. To use this animation, copy this line of text for cubic Bezier, replace the animation timing function with that line of text. So now we have that custom animation. I don't really know what to name this animation. Let's name it the electric slide. For a final exercise, let's apply an animation to an image. I just so happen to have an image of Shrek. Let's have Shrek perform our electric slide animation. Let's replace our box with an image element. Set the source to equal the relative file path. So Shrek is right next to my index file, shrek.png. Let's copy all of these animation properties, cut them. We'll select our image, then paste those animation properties. Now Shrek will perform that electric slide animation. Pretty cool, right? All right, everybody, that is an introduction to animations using CSS.